Oh, look at this. We've got a crowd. Yay. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Nice spring weather. We're glad you decided to come in a little early. Just the normal housekeeping tips of Act 48. Can we make that? Yeah, we can make that available. We'll send out a survey. You know what to do, and then you'll get credit. We are recording, and we do ask tonight that if you have questions, please use the chat box and do it that way. And then when the presentation is over, we can take questions verbally too, if you want to ask them and unmute yourself instead. But during the presentation, if anything, any topics that you think of or, questions, please use the chat box. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mark Despotakis.
Hello, everyone. I am Mark Despotakis. I'm the Director of Public and Government Affairs here at PMEA, and we're so thankful that you're joining us to talk about how you can get federal stimulus money for music education in Pennsylvania in your school. We're going to talk through a little bit of the broad view of what that means, where this money comes from, how much there is. We're going to talk a little bit about then how can you use that money, and then we're going to talk about what that process is. How do you actually get that money for you in your district? So hopefully we're gonna have a lot of good takeaway stuff for you tonight that you can go back and speak to your administrators about. But before we kind of get into the specifics of what you can ask for and how you can ask for, we're gonna have a little bit of a conversation here to begin with. Dr. Tom Ralston is the superintendent in the Avonworth School District. He's been the superintendent there since 2012. Prior to that, he was a middle school principal and a science teacher, but he has definitely been a friend of music education. He is the 2020 PMEA Outstanding Superintendent. If you want to get a better sense of him, there's a great video on YouTube where Dr. Ralston and I chatted a little bit a few months ago, and you can hear a little bit about his backstory as far as how music education came into his life at some points as well. But we're going to talk to him as far as what, as a superintendent, what are you thinking about when you're looking at all of this federal funding, and what does this mean, and how does that work for you as a music educator? So Tom, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us and join us tonight. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Mark, and hello to everyone that's tuning in tonight. And I just want to say to everyone, thank you for all of your efforts, because we know what a trying time this last year and a half has been. And we just, as a school administrator, I want to say how much I appreciate everyone's efforts, because it has truly been, a heavy lift. But people have, as all educators always do, they rise to the occasion.
Absolutely. And one other point I want to make, I want to offer congratulations to you on another level. As today, the NAM Foundation announced their best communities for music education for 2021, and the Avonworth School District was named as one of those. So congratulations to you on your leadership to help make that happen.
Well, thanks again, Mark. We have a wonderful group of music educators in our district, and our community has done such a wonderful job supporting music. It makes my job very easy.
Well, that's what we like to hear. Okay, so let's talk some federal funding stuff. So in a couple minutes, we're going to talk about what ESSER is and what ARP is and what all these acronyms are. For now, we're just going to say there's a lot of money coming from the federal government to schools. I dare to say more than any of us will see in a 12-month span in our lifetime. It's kind of interesting, if you look at the federal education law that we're under, ESSA, that we thought, okay, the amount of money that went into ESSA was probably the biggest new grant that we would ever see with that Title IV funds, because federal grants don't just happen all the time. And we all thought, okay, that's the biggest we're ever going to see in our careers in this area. And now we see all of this. Of course, it's very targeted from stimulus money. And again, we're going to talk about that in a second. But with that in mind, talk about the impact on this influx of federal money on your district. What does that mean for you as somebody who's at that 30,000 foot level of your school district?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. So this is actually the third round of federal stimulus dollars that's come our way. And, honestly, when we received the first allocation of money, we were looking at things with regard to, how do we safely open schools? How do we create an environment that's going to be as safe as possible for our students? And so we were allocating money towards things like touchless faucets, right? The toilets that flush automatically, those types of things, right? And also, obviously, making sure we had enough cleaning supplies, masks, all those types of things, right? And now, as we've headed into this third round of funding that we're looking at, we're really focused on looking at, what the cost has been to students over the course of the school year. And we know we've, as much as everyone has done a wonderful job of keeping schools open and trying to keep programs up and running, we know that there have been certain programs that haven't been able to do some of the things they've done in the past, right? So for us, we're really looking at turning our attention to the now and the summer and the fall coming up, right? And thinking about how we can enhance those programs that really, students haven't had the opportunity that they've had in the past. So as this money is being allocated to school districts, it's really meant to supplement, not supplant budgets, right? So districts are supposed to be using this money to supplement programming due to the pandemic, right? Not necessarily take a look at their budget and say, well, we've got a shortfall of $1.5 million in our budget, and so we're just going to plug that hole with that money. That's really not what it's supposed to be used for. So we're looking for more, educationally oriented things. Obviously, mental health. Social emotional pieces are a big part of that. We want to take care of our kids. We know that definitely the pandemic has taken a toll on them because of that. But we also want to think about our programming. And in particular, in Avonworth, one of the things that we are considering is summer programming. We know that the vaccine programs are really gaining momentum. We're creating an environment out there that's going to be safer for those that were most at risk. And now we want to think about, how can we provide summer programming, not just for interventions for academic purposes, but also what can we do for things for students who missed out on special projects or programs that were compromised due to the pandemic.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you speak to this point of summer programming, and we're going to come back to this later, but I want to throw this out there right now. If you're a music teacher, think, okay, let's say you're beginning band teacher. Were you able to start students last fall? Well, maybe, but probably not in the same way that you could always recruit. So does that mean that maybe there's a summer program that starts for those fourth graders who are moving into fifth grade who couldn't start? And so that's going to get them a little bit more caught up. Those are the types of things that this money actually can be used for. And in fact, this third round of funding very much speaks specifically to, hey, school districts, you should be using your money in that way to kind of take care of that interruption of learning time.
Exactly. And, Eve, I'll put another spin on this as well. So, if you think about equity, right, which we know is important to all of us, we want to make sure that all of these opportunities are available to all students. And so we think about transportation in the summertime. And, if we're going to run these summer programs, we need to be able to get the students to school or wherever the location we've identified that we're going to hold these programs. And so transportation, which we know is expensive, but, being able to offer busing to get the students to the program is going to be really, really important.
So a little bit of your thought process here as, all right, you've, as a superintendent, I'm sure you've taken a lot in the last year. There's been a lot on your shoulders, more than in your career ever, I'm sure. So now you're at this place where you say, okay, I have this amount of money coming to me and I have to start thinking about how do I prioritize? Because yes, it's a lot of money, but it's not infinite money. So you're still going to be making priorities. I'm curious kind of what is in your head then as far as process. How do you think of who gets, what's more important here, or how do we divide this up?
Right. All right. So we always run an extended school year program in summer tutoring. We always do that. So we're going to continue that. And we do have a budget allocation outside of ESSER for those programs. We also want to expand due to some of our own metrics based upon learning loss due to the pandemic, to expand that tutoring program out there for students. But we're also looking to create almost a summer camp type of environment. I talked to our principals and teachers and said, look, I want this to look like school. I really want it to look like a summer camp, and we take a different approach to this. And it's not just for music, but for a lot of other programs, academic programs as well, where we're thinking about, maybe there's a special project that a science teacher or a social studies teacher, they weren't able to offer this year due to the pandemic, and they really, they're very passionate about that. And so, we want to provide that opportunity for a 1 or 2 week window in the summertime that we can advertise out to our parents. We've already identified some dates in July. And right now we're in the process of identifying the teachers. It's obviously going to be optional whether the teachers want to offer these programs. So we're reaching out, we're going to compensate them, obviously using the ESSER funds. So that certainly helps us out also with our budget, but it also helps teachers out to supplement their income. And again, we're actually, my administrative team is meeting tomorrow, and there's some urgency to this for us because we know parents make summer plans. So we want to get this information out there to them as soon as possible. So we're going to be meeting in the morning and trying to determine, basically through their conversations, the building principals they've had with all of their staff members, what are the programs we want to be able to prioritize and offer in the summer. And we want there to be a balance of those programs so it meets the needs of all of our students.
So to everyone listening here, this is a template. You have just laid out a fantastic template of this idea of a summer program that is like school, but not like school. Okay. And I think that's really important, and music can have a really important place in there. So I'm going to say to you, maybe you and I, let's come back together here in a couple of weeks, because I want to know how that meeting goes tomorrow morning. And I want to steal some of those ideas and template that and tell other districts, this is a doable thing.
Well, the other thing too, I'll add too, Mark, is that we want to ensure that we're thinking outside the box with these programs and make them very innovative. And so if we can combine music with other subjects, that's where I really want us to think creatively about how we can do this. And so I love when we have staff members that are working together from different subject areas. They work really well with one another, and we build this really innovative marriage of sorts where their creative juices get flowing, and we end up with a great result, a great project.
Okay, so we're here in a room filled with music educators, and in just a couple minutes, they're going to get a lot of specifics thrown at them. They're going to get numbers thrown at them. They're going to get some ideas. We're going to talk a little bit about the process. So my question to you, as sitting at an administrative level on the receiving end of lots of asks for money, and now that people know you have this little extra pot of money, okay, what is important to you? So music teacher A walks into your office and says, hey, I hear that you have a bunch of money that came from the federal government. I'd like to use it for music education programs. What's the backup to that is important for you to hear that helps, them make their case to you?
Right. Well, obviously, I'd want to hear what their ideas are, some specifics about that, right? And I would want to hear, basically how they've been impacted by the pandemic and why they feel like this benefits kids, right? That's what it's all about. It's really about what's the impact on our students. And so, I think they would want to be able to articulate that very, very well about what their objectives are. What is your objective in this program? It's not just about providing an opportunity, but also working towards an end goal, right? And so have that mapped out. Really, you think deeply about that. And like I said, I would think creatively about these things. You know, it's not just about taking that program that you would have done and doing it the same way, but doing it in a different way. Because let's all, I think, all understand that this has been a long haul for everyone, for teachers, administrators, and for students. It's been a challenging time. And so, you know, I think we want to, you know, be creative as possible to make sure that, you know, it's not just, you know, the things they would have maybe experienced during the school year, but we're approaching things in a different way. So I love to see creative approaches and innovative approaches to things that people have thought through. And, you know, obviously I always want people to think about, you know, their program being the most important program in the building, right? So I want to see advocacy. And so, you know, those are the things I would be looking for in a proposal that someone might bring towards me. And honestly, I try to tell my administrators, let's always try to, I want to try to find a way to say yes. You know, I think that's a great quality for administrators, is if they can find a way to say yes. And we can't do it all the time, but as much as we possibly can, especially if we see, you know, a well-articulated, well thought out program, let's try to find a way to do that.
Yeah, you know, I can't thank you enough for your thoughts there on thinking through the process. And I think we all see why you are the 2020 PMEA Outstanding Superintendent, because yeah, you do understand the important role of music, but you see how it fits into the bigger picture. And so thank you for that, and thank you for all that you have shared tonight. And I guarantee I will be calling on you for some more information as you go through this process here in the coming months.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Mark. And again, thanks for having me on. And I just wish everyone a successful end run here. You know, let's get through the rest of the school year, the last 9 weeks, and I wish everyone health and success in doing that.
Yes, and same to you and all of your staff and your family. So thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk a bit now about some of the specifics of what does this actually mean? What is all of this money? Okay, what is available, and what should you be looking out for? So okay, there's been 3 rounds here of money. So ESSER 1, let's go back a year in time. So what happened last year, this is in March of 2020, there was the CARES Act that was passed. So there was a lot of money for a lot of things. And part of that was money for education. So put into law at the end of March 2020. So the Department of Education at the federal level received $30.75 billion. Okay, a lot of money for education. Of that, 13.2 went to what we know as ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Funds. The rest went to higher ed, and then some went to this governor's funding. So each state's governors were able to put money in certain areas of education. So the way that these funds were distributed, so remember, we're a year ago, the way that they were distributed was in the same proportion that your school would receive Title I Part A funds. So you all are familiar with Title I. That was just the way that they said, we're going to distribute the funding through that formula. However, the caveat was the schools do not have to follow the allocation guidelines that come with Title I. So they were much broader. The funds that were received as part of this have to be obligated, meaning the district has to say where they're going to, and those are for expenses between March 13th and September 30th of 2022. Okay, so noteworthy that you know, your district might still have some of these funds left that they can still obligate through September of next year. And then the states actually have to provide the money to schools within a year of receiving them, which would mean April to June of this year. It's not an issue in Pennsylvania. Okay, so then ESSER 2, all right? So the second COVID relief bill happened this past December, all right? And then it extended a lot of the things that happened in that CARES Act that we knew about, that I just talked about, for March. So putting $54.3 billion into the money that went to schools. the slight note here is that this money can't be used until that original amount is used. The obligation period goes back to March 13th of last year through September of 2023. So ESSER 1 obligated through September of 2022, these through September of 2023. At the risk of getting into the weeds a little bit, what that means is a district has to say, we are going to use it for this. We have to say that by a certain point in time. If it's a contract for something, potentially they might not have to actually write the check until after those days, as long as they have obligated where the funds goes. And then again, the same rule applied, that states have to award those funds to schools within a year of receiving them, which would be January of next year. Of course, again, not an issue in Pennsylvania. And what was different about ESSER 2? So whenever a school district receives federal funding, they have to then provide a portion of those federal funds to non-public schools in their school district as part of the federal education law, ESSA. And so when ESSER 1 came out, that still had to happen. That's still how the money had to flow. In ESSER 2, there was a separate amount of money that went as emergency funds for non-public schools. So this big chunk of money was all solely for public schools. Oops. All right, so here we are to ESSER 3, which is part of the ARP, the American Rescue Plan. So this is what just passed here not too long ago. $129 billion for education was in this. So what happens is when this money goes to schools, goes to states, the states are allowed to reserve a certain percentage of the money. In this case, it's 10% for uses at the state level for the benefit of all districts and all students in the state. So at least 90% of these funds are going to go to schools and charter schools. And again, using the Title I-A formula that's been used under ESSA. Okay, what happened though in this ESSER 3 is these funds are a little bit more targeted, and you heard Dr. Ralston and I talk about this a little bit with things in mind like learning recovery, summer enrichment. I can't emphasize how important this is. I'm going to come back to this in a second. After school programming, and there's a variety of other things, but those are the three big ones that there's some targeting in the language. So what happened is the federal government said, all right, we are going to release 2/3 of this money to states. The remaining third of the money will be released to states once reopening plans are provided by districts. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. The federal government really, even if the reopening plan comes to the federal government and it is pretty vague or it is not, it's not acceptable to them, that money will still flow. There's nothing in that Congress said when they passed this law that said that it's contingent upon this. But they're asking to do it, and likely states and school districts will comply with that. So of this third round of money, only 2/3 of the dollars have been released. And then this money can be obligated through October 2024. ESSER 1, 2022, ESSER 2, 23, ESSER 3, 24. So I make those dates known to you just to let you know that some school districts are going to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to try to use this money now because we have all of it. Others are going to say, okay, maybe we can use some of it, and maybe we need to think a little bit more long-term, and long-term being over the next 2 to 3 years, because they will have the money available in that time frame. And because ESSER 3 is so new, there are a lot of specifics still developing on it, but it looks like it will be rolled out similar to ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. So what does this mean in Pennsylvania? Okay. Those are the dollar amounts that Pennsylvania received. It equals up to about $7.7 billion, which is an incredible amount of money coming between the three of these going towards education. And I, just as a note, there are state set-asides that the state uses that are are totals, and these numbers don't include that. If you're looking for what your district received, feel free to reach out to me at advocacy@pmea.net, and I can get that information for you. So let's talk about actually using this funding. So this federal investment is likely the largest in history and the largest we will ever see. Depending on what your school receives on a normal basis, this could equal up to 4 or 5 times regular funding that a school would be receiving from the federal government. That's not the case in every district. It depends on how the formula goes, but suffice it to say, this is an incredible amount of money being directed at education. President Biden is talking about an infrastructure plan that we might hear about here in the coming weeks to months. And in part of the draft of that plan, there's talk about adding more money that would go to schools specifically to upgrade infrastructure. So there could be even more money coming to schools. And I would think that administrators would also be thinking, if this does pass, or if this looks like it has some momentum to pass, they might say, okay, maybe some of the infrastructure type things we were going to do with those ESSER funds, we might push and use somewhere else, because we know we have some infrastructure money coming in the coming months. As Dr. Ralston noted, anytime you receive these federal funds, these are not for recurring expenses, and they are not to take the place of funding that you already have. This really shouldn't fill holes. This is extra money for extra things, is kind of the simplified way to think about it. So in these ESSER laws, the federal government spelled out 12 areas for uses of funds. And one of them is, it specifically says this money can be used for areas already available under ESSA. So if you know me, you know when I speak ESSA, I think Title IV, and I say we have to use that money for music education, because Title IV speaks to the value of a well-rounded education, which we know means music, and the law says music is part of a well-rounded education. So that means Congress has said these ESSER funds can specifically be used in these areas that are already in place under ESSA. Also of note is there is a push in Pennsylvania to fund schools from the state level at a higher amount than in previous years. The governor has proposed a pretty substantial increase in funding for education, which is a huge piece of school districts' funding, is that state piece. So there is a possibility that there will be more funds going to schools. I think the governor's proposal is probably unlikely to pass exactly as it is in place. However, I think there is momentum that more money in some way will go to schools than we've seen in the past few years. And as we're here talking about money, I want you to take away this point. Because we're talking about so much money, and because we're talking about the real possibility that in Pennsylvania, there will be a push for some more funding for schools from the state level, funding might not be your biggest obstacle in the fall. Scheduling may be, because as school comes back in person, you're dealing with catching up on learning that students have missed out on in the past year from being in a virtual situation. Okay, so let's talk about, here are some actual possibilities, possible ways you can use this money. Again, keep in mind that the goal is of all of these federal funds is to address learning loss that's happened as a result of the pandemic. So what can some of this pay for? In-school or after-school music education programming. You heard what Dr. Ralston said. Can you come with some innovative way to come up with a music education program that will help with the learning loss that has happened in music education in the past year? A learning camp. This is, to me, the biggest opportunity that we have. As I mentioned a little earlier, let's say you are a beginning instrumental music teacher and you were not able to start 4th grade band students last fall, or you were only able to start a smaller percentage than normal. Perhaps what you do is you have a camp in the summer that is maybe tied to a larger district camp. Maybe it is just an arts camp. Maybe it is just a music camp, whatever works in your district. But you can then start those fourth graders who weren't able to start last fall, in addition to starting the new fourth graders coming in this fall, and give them a jump start, because this fall will not look like a normal fall. Yes, we may likely be back in school more, but we will be adapting to going back to school. So things are not going to be the same, including that idea of can we actually start beginning band and orchestra students as we traditionally have, even if we're back in school. So I can't emphasize enough this point about a learning camp. Purchase of software that would assist in a hybrid situation or remote learning, because you are still going to be in those situations in the fall in some places. Are there facility improvements that are necessary, including proper ventilation, things to think about there? Sanitizing supplies for instruments. These things are not going away as we come back into the fall. PPE, masks and bell covers, probably not going away in the fall. So probably still important. If you have not been able to purchase these yet, you can go to your administrators and say, this is something I want to use this money for. Getting instruments for students that are financially unable to obtain them. Does your district purchase instruments? Do they potentially rent some instruments for a period of time? Which again, that ties back to learning loss. If you have students that have typically shared instruments, but now that becomes a problem of access, because you can't have students sharing a tuba or a French horn or whatever it is that you might have them share, is it purchasing another school instrument so that you can take away that problem of avoiding students sharing? Professional development, we know that in the past 12 months, there's been more professional development happening than has happened in the last 10 years. But we also know that even as we move into the end of this school year and in the beginning of the next school year, we don't know what the next school year looks like still. So professional development will still be ongoing and changing. And it will be important for you to receive that professional development. And then, is there any type of materials that will be necessary to set up your classroom in such a way that there is a physical distance between students? Is it more music stands, etc.? So these are some ideas of things that you can actually spend this federal money on. So right now, I want to introduce two folks here, Dr. Dorie Martin-Pitone and Denise Land. Dr. Martin-Pitone is the Director of Teaching and Learning in the Marple-Newtown School District. Denise is the Assistant Business Manager in the Marple-Newtown School District. And I want to congratulate both of you, as I did Dr. Ralston, on being named today as a Best Community for Music Education by the NAM Foundation. It's wonderful to have your support of music education from an administrative level. But I'm going to turn it over to you here for a few minutes, because you're going to talk about the process that you have to go through as the decision makers and the people that are actually putting pen to paper when it comes to writing these federal grants.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you all for what you do every day for students. And that truly is, I'm going to circle back to a few things that were mentioned earlier. When it was said, find a way to say yes, we're going to help you find a way so your administrators will say yes. And the better prepared you are when you go in for those conversations, that's one way they will say yes. Denise Land and I have become close partners because the fiscal side of the federal programs has increased immensely. So for everything that you ask for, or when you fill out the grant application, which is part of my job, I work with my superintendent. So if the superintendent came to me and said, hey, I would like to do ABC with this grant, I then have to create a narrative. So the more information you can provide, the better. We are more than nuts and bolts people behind these grant applications. So the simple process is, before you come to an idea, you have to conduct some kind of informal needs assessment. You could send out a survey. You can meet with your departments to say, what's our priority of need? What do we find in this environment would be most useful, in addition to, not in place of, in addition to, as was mentioned earlier. So that's your first step, because you want to make sure that you spoke with your colleagues. It's not something done in isolation. You might want to even send out something to your families to say, what would they feel would be most beneficial for your students? Get their voice involved. You could also go and speak with your building administrator to say, what do you feel from a district perspective in regard to your colleagues in the other buildings that would support our team? So you have to do some kind of informal needs assessment. That's your why. That's going to establish, why are we doing this? Yes, it's for kids, but for who, for what? So then you get into creating your plan, and you want to base it upon wherever that information came from: your survey, your conversations, your focus groups, your need. And here's where you really need to think about what resources are necessary. It's one thing to come with a plan, but then it's that layered process. For instance, transportation. I'm going to show you an example where we put no transportation as provided, because for us, when we went to consider our grant application, because our region is so wide, it would consume a large majority of our funds if we were to provide transportation. So it didn't outweigh the benefit of what we could provide. You want to think about, if you want to have teachers providing the instruction, you're going to have to pay their benefits, their same hourly rate contractually. You want to think of all those items and have a budget ready to go to say, here's what I know it will cost. Here's about the cost of those items. That's where Denise Land in the business side of things comes into play, because she quickly can give me a spreadsheet and say, how many hours are you thinking? How many people? HR is always involved too, because they would have to post for those positions, and that would need to be approved through your board. So there's a lot of procedure behind this. It's wonderful to come with the idea, but again, the more prepared you are to go to your school board and present and speak to these things, the better chances you are having this to go through. The other part is facilities. Where are you gonna provide this camp, or where are you gonna, for how long? Is it going to be AM, PM session? So I'm going to give you an example and talk through that as well. When I say create a plan A and a plan B, plan A is your ideal. This is absolutely what we would like to do if we were able to, and there was enough funds to support that initiative. But in your mind, be prepared to have a plan B, where if we want to say yes, but we can't quite, maybe you want something, in the example I'll show you is for grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. But we can't support both because we just don't have the facilities. We're going to be cleaning them during the summer, and we won't be able to have that many students with our other programs running in that building. You're going to have to prioritize, and maybe that's your plan B. So that's how you have to think through some of these plans. Then you want to go to your building administrator and your federal programs coordinator and say, how can we? Here's what we have so far. Is there something we're missing? Could you support us in this endeavor? Here's where we think kids will benefit and why. Here's the research: social emotional learning, connection, culture, community, inclusion. These are the things that we want to focus upon. Here's where we feel it'll fit that need. Once you have that process, and I gave that to you in a quick nutshell, you can move forward. So Mark, if you could be so kind, I'll go to an example. We are offering in our district in-person options and virtual options. That was based on a survey we put out to our families to say, would you prefer in-person or virtual? If you really have to go through some of that back work first prior to getting approval. So I use the idea of Camp Harmony, summer learning, excuse me, Carl Camp. This came out of, we're not doing this per se, because I haven't had the conversations yet with our music department, because I have to think of our unified arts to say, what do we need? However, there are curriculum writing efforts we're going to support in terms of this funding. And our music department is one of those areas where, through this whole educational landscape, they've purchased digital resources that they now want to enhance and get more of a cohesive alignment. So we're going to support those curriculum efforts through our grant. If you were to go with a camp, you always want to start with your why. What's the why? Yes, it's beneficial for kids, but again, for who, for what? Why that group over this group? Is it everybody? Can you support everybody? So you need to give your why. Then your what. what is it you're going to be doing? How is it enriching? How is it preparing them more so than, yes, learning loss, but also you can enrich as well. So there's learning loss and enrichment. And when we say enrich, it could be personal enrichment. We're offering a virtual STEM option for just personal enrichment for students. So think along those lines also with music, that if it isn't an in-person option and you do virtual, is it going to be synchronous, asynchronous? Are you going to do it in grade level bands? Is it just going to be for personal enrichment for them to grow a passion and love of music and the arts? Or is it going to be for learning loss? Or is it going to be both? So you have some options here. Then you have to identify who. I put currently in italics because that'll matter. Students currently in grades 3 through 5 and 6 to 8 district require, because they're going to be moving up, and we want to ensure that they have the skills they need and they have this background before they move up. That's something you need to discuss. When are you going to just do a 3-hour session in the AM and that's it? Can you staff an AM and PM session? If you wanted to do 3, 5, and 6, 8, maybe 3, 5s AM, 6, 8 PM, Monday through Thursday, that still ensures that families can have a weekend. And for how long? What's the duration? Is it for 5 weeks? Is it for 3 weeks? Is it a week? That's the fiscal end where you're going to go and say, how much money do you have to support these efforts? Because again, we have learning loss in math and literacy. There's, in addition to ESY and our EL program, we're running this summer loss program. So these are the areas where you can be flexible. Denise Land, often, who is here, will say to me, Dory, your EL program, are you going to do 5 weeks, or are you going to have 3 instructors? I have to really think through, do I want to offer quality in 3 and have more teachers and instruction, or do I want to expose more students to this immersion in language for a longer period of time, but have less instructors, 2 sessions? So it's something for you to discuss. And then where, because your facilities come into play. For us, our challenge is that's when they get to clean all of the buildings, and they do it on a rotation basis. ESY is going to be happening in the beginning of the summer. That eliminates 1 elementary school. We have 4 elementary schools, 1 middle, 1 high. So I already know that if ESY for elementary and secondary is at our 1 elementary school, which is our central location, I already now have to go between 2 other schools for my summer learning programs. I have the virtual program going on. High school's doing credit recovery. I really can't offer my EL program until August. So maybe you might want to say, hey, we don't offer this until August, because by then they could have gotten around and done some cleaning in the facilities, and another building will be available to us. So that's why asking about facilities and getting your building administrator involved to say, when would our building be available, or when would these other buildings be available to house this if it were in person? Again, you'd be very clear, no transportation will be provided, no fee or associated cost. That's huge. We want to provide this to anyone who is willing and able and can get to us. Maybe they could even carpool, and if you give them enough notice, they can make those arrangements. But for us, transportation would have utilized predominant amount of our funds, and we wouldn't be able to provide as many programs. We have an invitation, but it's a commitment invitation. It's, we're inviting you, but you have to have a commitment that if we're going to offer something for 3 weeks and we're going to pay people to be here and commit to you, that we would hope that you would come for the full time, not just, oh, I'm going to be for 1 week and then we're going on vacation for the other 2. So that's something to consider as well, and have that Zoom meeting or initial orientation with your families. And then again, because I know one of the challenges we're facing in this environment is our teachers are exhausted and they deserve a summer as well. So we always say, based on interest, if even families are interested in this, there will be 2 to 4 music instructors. So if we can get, predominantly, we want our music instructors. And if we can't get them, it's then a conversation to say, is there anyone else that you feel would be capable, that you would bring from outside, that we could hire to run this program, that you still feel confidence in? Okay, can we pay you a few hours just to work with them in preparation for this program? So those are things. So always think, how can we? That's been a big challenge for us, where I utilize our department chairs to assist in writing the curriculum for the program. So I know our hands are in it in some way, that there's going to have our Marple. We know the learning that'll take place will still stay true to what we need to happen. So that's a quick process. Denise, I'm going to ask from the business office standpoint. I will tell you some of the questions she always asks me are, is this something you're looking to sustain? Which is a tricky one with this, because not necessarily this per se, but it would be nice down the line if something came out of this that we could offer maybe before or after school that could eventually be covered within a building budget. So it could be a springboard to other conversations. She'll also ask a couple of the coding questions for those narratives, and where do you want to put the lion's share of your money? If I'm going to work in music right now for our grant per se, our grant's already written and put in. I haven't even had an opportunity to talk to our music group, because I usually do that for Title IV. However, I knew they would need it for curriculum writing and was inclusive of those efforts in this grant. We do have an opportunity to go back, because this is over so many years. You do, for this application, have to provide a timeline and be pretty descriptive in terms of what will take place when. So the more information you can provide, it makes it easier on your federal programs coordinator, whomever is completing this grant. You're making their job easier. And that's what they'll want, because they won't be able to figure that out, and they might not represent what you really want as clearly as you would had you given them that information. So Denise, I'm going to ask, is there anything you would add as support?
Dory, at this time, the only thing I would encourage everyone to consider is broadening the focus a little bit. As you had said, the sustainability and going forward, these monies are through October of 2024. So again, everybody's ideas, you were speaking of burnout, creativity, the needs for people. I think it's one of those things that the money's there, and if people are very interested in the program but don't feel this summer is the right time, I think it's time to speak to the administrators, let them know that your thoughts are and how you see this developing and what your potential use is over the coming years, because that could be built in. So I don't think it's an immediately like first person presenting the case in this summer gets the money, because from our perspective, we want to keep it for all students, for in enrichment and learning loss for everybody over a period of time. And that may change, especially when things start coming back next year. You may find things that you didn't even know you needed or wanted. So I think everybody needs to remain flexible and know that it's not a quick cutoff at 12 months and we're done. It's like, it's evolving. You need your information to put in the grant, but it's also subject to change and needs for the students.
It's great advice, because we recently just reallocated ourselves. We tend to, the lion's share of the money I knew would be put, and with Denise, we talked it through, in our teachers. And it would be that we would need them, we would want them to be able to provide this instruction. And if not even the instruction, the writing of the curriculum and the professional development, along with, you mentioned that earlier, Mark, the professional development, in order even maybe to provide a program in August, so they feel secure with a new digital program. So think along those lines in terms of even having an initial conversation now with your administrators, your stakeholders, to say what would be our areas of priority, so we can start to flesh this out. And maybe we do something in August, or possibly a before and after school kind of session during the school year. We have that, you know, we have a couple facets, offshoots of our grant, where we're going to offer new registrant testing, which we haven't been able to do, and it's a need. It's even crucial, even more so now during the summer, but we want to sustain that before and after school, and we feel like that'll just start to build into something. So try to, when creative, it's also innovative. You want to look innovatively. How can I get this? But maybe something could shoot off of this that then we could sustain through our building, or that partnership with your federal programs coordinator, who would be us. I then build it in my Title IV. Denise knows, I always allot a little bit of money. My well-rounded education is predominant for the money. And that's how I came to know Mark, because we put it towards music, and we went with that needs assessment, helped us all prioritize a piece of equipment versus being able to get a group of students music and having district choir, which is the greater good. One tuba or all of these students being able to participate in this program. So those were the conversations we would have.
So Dory and Denise, thank you so much for all of that. I want to pull out 3 takeaways that I got from this. So number 1 is what Dory first started talking about was needs assessment. So if you don't know what needs assessment are, don't know how to do them, if you go to advocacy.pmea.net, it's the same process as we've talked about for Title IV funding. It's the same thought process. This is not a 35-page document you have to fill out. It is, as I always say, elementary school A has kindergarten music, elementary school B does not. I've just done a needs assessment. Okay, you have to come up with some more information beyond that, but it is, that's a major piece of your needs assessment there. Takeaway number 2, we talked a lot about summer camps here, okay? And every person who talked about summer camp talked about paying teachers. So part of this money is this idea of, yes, teachers will be paid out of these funds. So that's takeaway number 2. Takeaway number 3, and I've been saying this one for years, find the Dory in your school district, okay? By that, I mean the federal programs person, find out who that is, but then find the ally. Dory is an incredible ally for music and arts education, and really for all of education. And it's so wonderful that in her district, she is the federal programs person. So that's kind of where the roads meet, and that's really important. But find your federal programs person, but also find your champion. Find those champions in administration who can then help you through this process. So Dory and Denise, again, thank you so much for sharing your insight into this process. I can't tell you how much it is very helpful to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And Denise has it been because we'll help you advocate further, and Denise helps me to be a better advocate from the fiscal side. So if there's anything we can do further, Mark knows how to get in touch with us. We're always happy to help. And again, beyond grateful for all you're doing for students.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to just pass on a few resources as we wrap up here today. I mentioned one earlier, advocacy.pmea.net is the place to go to for all of our advocacy work, and you can find our Title IV toolkit there. And that's where you'll learn about these needs assessments and how to go through that process. Yes, it's designed for Title IV, but it's the same line of thinking for these federal funds we've talked about tonight. I would ask that if you have not visited that website, that when you do, you take action on our legislative policy asks that are right on there. It literally takes under a minute for you to do. You can click through. There's a pre-written email that you can add to or delete from as you see fit, and it will be sent to your Pennsylvania legislators, as well as the governor's office, on a variety of things there. And if you're interested in all of the policy work that we're working on, also on that website, you can see our policy playbook, which lays out all of the things that PMEA is working on. And then a plug for you, if you don't know, PMEA has a podcast called Take Note. We release 2 episodes every month. This month, 1 episode being released on April 7th, but we do 2 a month about things happening in music education in Pennsylvania and around the country, highlighting the positives and just hearing from PMEA members. So I encourage you to take a look at that. thank you all for being part of this this session about these federal funds. I guarantee you're going to be hearing more about this from PMEA, from NAFME, from other organizations that you are involved in, because again, this is such a huge influx of money that that's coming into education from the federal government that we will likely never see this amount again in our careers. If you have any questions or any other follow-up that you would like to direct to us, you can send it to advocacy@pmea.net. So thank you all so much for joining us. And again, if you have any questions, we're happy to take those. And let's see, there is one. There is one question in the chat about the amount that goes to private schools.